For your storytelling instinct to work for you, you must trust it. When writing, keep an ear listening to the tips it is giving you. Sarah Seidenberg.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. Welcome to our bonus episode, which is talking about all of those structures that we identified throughout this month and how to use those structures after you've written the book in order to help you tell the story you want to tell.
So this is for all of you pantsers out there like me, though stick around, plotters. There is still plenty for you to learn about structure, about applying it, about checking your structure once you have all the things together. Knowing and being familiar with structure really can help take your storytelling abilities to the next level. Even if you write without structure, being able to go back and make sure you're hitting plot beats and make sure your pacing is right is important for your overall storytelling abilities.
The biggest idea we really want to drive home goes along with our motto, and that is to write selfishly and trust your instincts. There is so much story in your life, regardless of if you're actually studying it or not. You are ingesting story everywhere you go. By ingesting stories, you are able to hone those instincts. And those instincts will do the job of structuring your story, even if you aren't inclined to do that yourself.
Because really, you do know more about structure than you think you do. Even as pantsers, you already know that something has to start the story. You already know that there has to be that inciting incident. And you definitely know there needs to be a single moment near the end where all of it accumulates, and you know that there needs to be a darkest moment. You know the character has to change. You know all of these things. So trust yourself in being able to follow it.
You also know on a more technical level as you're writing. When you're working through the story, you're processing, you're trying to figure out what works best and such. You know when the story is actually beginning. You know when you're bored. If you're bored, the readers are a lot more likely to be bored. You know when the story is about to end because this is where all of the pieces that you've placed throughout the whole novel come into effect. You even have an instinct for word count if you've been reading a lot, because you can feel when you've had enough story and stuff needs to start being put into place.
And you know when maybe you need a little bit more meat in this part of the story because it's moving too quickly. You just have to trust yourself. And really, you're the one who knows the story. You're the one who knows the characters. I recently found myself dealing with trying to write a particular story with a particular character, and it wasn't working. I just could not get past that first chapter because it didn't feel right. The voice wasn't right. So I jumped off to a different old project, realized that I really enjoyed that one, started writing it, and it suddenly came to me, I need a different main character. That's why the voice isn't right, is because I'm trying to pigeonhole it into this character I'd already created for a short story. And now that I can create an entirely new character for what I want the story to be, I have the freedom to do that because my instincts told me that something was wrong here. And now I think the story's going to be a lot better for it in the end.
But reading and following my instincts and all of that just makes me cliche because it's me doing what I've read other people do, right?
Wrong? Absolutely wrong. These instincts do not make you cliche. They are a good thing. They help you learn structure. They help you learn what things should be and what they shouldn't be. There's a reason why structures make it into 99.9% of fiction and a 100% of all good fiction. There has to be some kind of structure to a story because that's what readers expect. That's what they want, really. When's the last time you read a meandering story with no real purpose or direction and actually enjoyed it?
I was at a local writing group, and the leader did not have a lot of experience in writing, but he was very enthusiastic. And one of the things he said is he wanted to see more stories where there wasn't really an ending, where things just moved on in life. And I brought up to him, how do we know it's the ending then? How do we know that the story is over? We don't, because there is no climax scene in what he was proposing. There's no satisfaction in reading the story, knowing that the character has changed, knowing that we've been through this with them together. And I feel like he doesn't read a lot, because when you read, you manage to develop those instincts. You know how to end a story in your own voice, not as someone is telling you to. So make sure you are reading, especially what your target audience is reading. You can read other stuff too, that's fine. But your instincts will align with the target audience of the genre that you are reading.
And really, it's important to read a lot of things, because you can always pull elements from this murder mystery story into your fantasy story, because they have different plot structures, they have different flows. But if you want to have a little bit of that mystery element in your fantasy, go read some mystery. Build the instincts there. Learn what is expected, what is there, how the structure goes. And then read a lot of fantasy so you also meet those expectations. And then you can build it together and work it out so that it tells this beautiful combined story. But if you're just reading mostly nonfiction, self-help books or whatever, you're not going to have the same instincts that you should if you go then and try to write fiction. I would never try to write a memoir because I don't know what's expected. I don't like reading them, so I don't want to write one. And I would never be able to write one that fits the expected style because I won't read it. So stop trying to write in genres where you don't read.
A lot of the stuff that we've talked about this month comes down to understanding the story structure and the genre attached to it. Up and Jaws did not have the same story structure, but they definitely didn't have the same target audience. If you tried applying Jaws' story to something like Up, the prologue would have felt like a murder mystery of why did Ellie actually die? And we're completely misleading the audience if you're misapplying the story structure. Understanding the recipe that works for your genre is like knowing this is the recipe for bread, this is the recipe for cake. And having these two behave separately, you rest one and you don't the other, you add more sugar here than there. These kinds of things help define your book as bread or cake or whatever it is that you're doing. And your audience is going to be a lot more satisfied with the story that you give them.
Each genre has expectations for how the story is going to turn out. If you are going to write a murder mystery, you need to have a murder and a mystery. It has to be some kind of whodunit. You're going to have a large secondary cast because you need to have red herrings. And you're not going to have a lot of really tertiary characters because you don't want your readers to be looking at these other random characters and suspecting them when you need them to be following other threads. Like you in Glass Onion suspecting the stoner dude.
Yeah, they were playing with a lot of the genre tropes in that because they were aware that their audience was very aware of the genre tropes. So they had a little bit more of that leeway when crafting their story. Something else to keep in mind is that there are structures that are near universal. There is an instinct for these in just being a human being. That 3-act structure works because it makes sense. The Save the Cat / beat sheet works in with that Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 story structure. These are very similar. They overlap in a lot of ways.
Even one of my favorites, that's the 7-point structure, fits within the 3-act structure as well. Yeah, you can have some variations, but most stories these days fit within 3-act structures.
But that doesn't mean it has to be only that. One of the things that I really want to drive home this episode is that you can have more than one plot structure applied to your story. You can be both the Up story structure and the 3-act story structure. You can have that story within a story plus the traditional hero's journey. You can overlap these stories, and that combination, I think, can make a story thrive and feel unique in their story structure, even though you're using tried and true and proven recipes for stories.
So if you look at something like Mistborn, where it is half a hero's journey, where you have Vin pulled from a terrible circumstance, told she has incredible power and that she needs to help take out the evil empire. Very, very hero's journey. But then half of the plot is also a heist. There's a crew of experts, each with their own specialty, and they all have a specific place within this heist that needs to happen for the heist to be successful. So it is possible to mix two very different forms of storytelling and different general structures into one. Try not to go with too many. More than 3, and even 3 can be pushing it because it gets cluttered. It gets a little overwhelming, and then too many structures and you lose structure entirely.
The 3-act structure in Save the Cat that we talked about a moment ago are rarely on their own. They will more than likely show up in whatever story you write regardless. So they can be that third, but really these other more genre-specific type stories, overlapping 2 is great. Overlapping more than 3 gets a little convoluted.
A lot of the structures that we do talk about that we've shared before in the past have overlapping plot points. Most stories will have a midpoint. All stories have to have some kind of inciting incident. All stories have to have some kind of climax. So you can use those points to help align the different structures and then play with how they work in the in-between.
If you look at something like the Pixar structure where it starts off at once upon a time and that ends up being kind of a prologue, in Up that was the romance of Carl and Ellie. And then you look at the prologue type structure in something like Jaws, where the main character is not involved and it's a murder happening, you're establishing the monster. And you mix those together, you look at the prologues and where those overlap, you can do something that ends up kind of like Tangled did, where you've got the prologue introducing the villain, like the monster did, but you also have this once upon a time feeling of this is the story before the story begins. So by applying both of these, you end up with something that feels very unique and natural at the same time.
So for all of you pantsers out there, you may be wondering, okay, so what does all of this mean for me as a pantser? We've talked about instinct, making sure you follow those. We've talked about the fact that you can play with general plot structure and be okay with it, which is a lot easier for pantsers to do than plotters, in my opinion. Now, when it comes to using structure as a pantser, one of the things that we recommend trying is auditing your story. This is a process that you start after you've finished your first draft. After you have everything written down that you want for the story so far, you can go back and see those scenes and check against a plot structure that you think fits well with the story that you've made.
You often don't know what your structure is before you sit down to write as a pantser. So you don't always recognize how far into the story that inciting action needs to be. You don't recognize where that climax is and how long the happily ever after should last until it's written. That's part of being a pantser. But if you go, this ended up being a murder mystery, and this starts with 20 pages of the character establishing the world. You can do that in a hero's journey. With a murder mystery, that's a lot more difficult. So you look at that and go, we need to have a murder happen, and then all of this stuff, and then the character gets involved and blah, 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 blah. So you can check what your story ended up being against the story structure that is a proven recipe and see where you align.
And knowing how your story ended up, knowing that final structure, the expectations around it that we talked about earlier, can help you with marketing the story. Because sometimes you go into baking thinking you're going to make a chocolate cake, but you forgot to put enough eggs in, and so now it's a brownie. If you continue to market it as a chocolate cake, you're going to have a lot of really disappointed people because those have two wildly different textures. But if you realize, hey, this still works, I just need to shift my view on it a little bit and call it a brownie, market it as a brownie, you're more likely to sell it because it looks like the brownie that it is.
And it doesn't matter how good of a baker you actually are. How you label it will help other people define and adjust their expectations of what you are actually good at. So, out of the metaphor here, if you're marketing your romance suspense as a suspense romance, then we don't necessarily have to have the happily ever after, and then we might get a little annoyed at the happily ever after.
You know, that's the difference between having a romantic suspense story and a suspenseful romance. Expectations between those two, even though the words are the same, very different. Another reason why auditing is so good after you finish writing the book is because it can help you identify problems. If the pacing feels off and you don't quite know why, if maybe things are a little bit slow or they didn't progress exactly how they need to be, checking it against a story structure can help you realize, okay, maybe you have too little in that middle act and the exploration there, or maybe you have too much there. Maybe the front end is weighted a little too heavily and you don't have enough development in the back end to really reach that pinnacle of the character's arc. Checking those plot beats against a established structure can help you identify things that may be too long or too short.
As a plotter, it's before I write the novel, but as a pantser, it could easily be after you write the novel. The way I do this is by percentage or by word count. I want that midpoint reversal at halfway through the book. Therefore, it needs to be at 45,000 words for my current work in progress, because I anticipate that book being about 90,000. If it turns out that my midpoint reversal is at 45,000 and I'm writing a sci-fi and it's 145,000 words long, then there's a problem. So checking by percentage, or in my world, I do it by word count because then I know how long I have before I have to get to the next plot point. Checking that is a great way to just quickly audit and go, okay, 7-point plot structure. I have 70,000 words, so each one has to happen at 10,000 word interval. Sure. Check in your manuscript 10,000 words in. Are we hitting that inciting incident? Next 10,000 words. Are we hitting that pinch point? These percentages, or in my world, I do it by word count, can help you identify where things are bloated, where things are rushed and too fast. And they can help you make sure that your story continues at an enjoyable and ingestible pace.
It can also help you make sure you didn't miss any important plot pieces that the audience is actually expecting. So if you happen to miss a pinch point near the beginning that's going to make a real big difference in how the characters interact with each other and the motivations of that main character leading up to that midpoint, it's going to mess with the overall ability to tell the story. So by checking it against a structure, you can identify maybe you did miss a pinch point around here and you need to add something with a little bit more tension.
Or if you're doing a monster fiction or a murder mystery, and you know that the classic structure opens up with the murder of the first victim or the first victim that gets the main character involved, you're aware that this is how the structure is, then you can easily telegraph to your audience, this is the type of story you can expect, this is how you're going to enjoy it the most. So throwing in that little scene can make a huge difference in how your readers approach the story and how much they enjoy the story. The last thing I wanted to mention about applying these structures, especially after you've written the story, is when you're working with other people. So if you are beta reading for someone, or if you're in a writing club, these kinds of things, being able to identify this is the plot structure you're going for will help you make sure that they're on track as well. I have somebody in a local writing club that I am part of, and I was talking to him when I was doing research for, I believe it was Welcome to Marwyn, and that had the 4-act structure, which is something that I wasn't familiar with prior to this research. I knew it existed, but I wasn't sure how it best applied. So I was talking to him afterward going, I think this is the plot structure that you're going for in the snippets of your book that I've read so far. And that has helped him make sure that his story stays on track and is in line with the story he's trying to tell.
Next month, we're going to be talking about the craft side of things again, really digging into that and addressing the things in your book that aren't words, but still communicate things to your readers. Anything from how you format the final product to epigraphs and how you chapter your book.
These types of things, even something as simple as white space, can be very helpful in making sure that your writing has an impact. It hits hard and your readers stay engaged the whole way through. They don't get fatigued because you've got paragraphs of description and that kind of thing. How you format and how you use white space can completely upend the way your story is being told. So this is something else to keep in mind, and we're going to do a deep dive into that next month, so stay tuned. And until then,
Write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.